$5 million for intentional fraud.
Then, whose child did I raise?
Please, not here.
The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air vent click on. A bailiff shifted his weight. Someone in the back row stifled a cough. On the polished table, a yellow legal pad sat perfectly squared with the edge, as if symmetry could keep the room from tipping into chaos. And then the judge said it. Based on the evidence and the findings of intentional misrepresentation, the court orders restitution and damages. Ethan Cole didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared at the wood grain in front of him like it might rearrange itself into a sentence he could understand. $5 million, the judge continued, voice calm and flat, to be paid by the respondent to the petitioner. The number hung in the air. $5 million, not as a lottery win, not as a business deal, as a price tag on 8 years of someone else's lie. Across the aisle, Alyssa Cole's face drained of color. The hand she'd been clutching around her tissue loosened, and the tissue slipped to the floor, twisting like a small white flag. Ethan finally turned his head, slow, as if moving too fast might break the fragile reality that had just snapped into place. Alyssa wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the judge, at the clock, at anything except the man she'd once sworn to. Because the truth had been spoken out loud, on the record. The child Ethan had raised, who called him Dad, who knew the sound of his keys in the front door, who fell asleep on his shoulder during thunderstorms, wasn't biologically his, and the court had decided that the lie wasn't a misunderstanding. It was fraud, it was deliberate, it was expensive. A few minutes later, as the courtroom emptied and the hallway filled with the squeak of dress shoes and murmured reactions, Ethan remained seated. His attorney leaned in and whispered something gentle, some version of, "We did it, it's over." But Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the doorway. Because winning didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in the wreckage of a life you still loved. And if you're wondering how a paternity case becomes a $5 million payback, you have to rewind to the beginning, to a different kind of quiet. The quiet of a hospital room at 2:17 a.m. The quiet after a newborn's first cry settles into a softer rhythm. The quiet where people sign papers they don't read because everyone around them keeps smiling. That's where it started. Not with a DNA test, not with a judge, with a signature. Ethan met Alyssa at a charity event that felt more like a carefully lit networking party than anything truly charitable. A downtown hotel ballroom, cold air conditioning, little dessert spoons clinking against glass plates. Ethan didn't belong to that world. He was a project manager for a construction firm, practical, hands-on, the kind of man who knew how to fix a broken hinge and actually enjoyed it. Alyssa did belong. She worked in marketing for a fast-growing healthcare company, the kind of place that talked about disruption and vertical integration like it was a second language. They were an unlikely match, which made them magnetic. Ethan liked how Alyssa made him feel seen in rooms where he usually felt invisible. Alyssa liked how Ethan made the world feel simpler, like there were still honest rules. They moved quickly. 6 months after that ballroom night, they were engaged. 9 months after that, they were married. And a year later, Alyssa was pregnant. If you ask Ethan now, he'll tell you he remembers the exact moment Alyssa told him. Not because it was romantic, because it was off. It happened on a Tuesday. Ordinary light through the kitchen blinds, a cereal bowl in the sink, Alyssa holding a small white stick like it was fragile. Ethan hugged her. He laughed. He said, "We did it." But Alyssa's laugh didn't rise to match his. It stayed low, tight, as if her body had forgotten the shape of joy. Ethan chalked it up to nerves. People do that. You explain away the first strange detail because you want the story to stay clean. The pregnancy went smoothly. Prenatal appointments, painted nursery walls, Ethan assembling a crib while Alyssa sat on the floor and handed him screws. There was one awkward argument in the middle of it all. Something about a trip Alyssa insisted on taking alone. She called it a work retreat. Ethan asked why spouses weren't invited. Alyssa snapped back that he was being controlling. Ethan apologized, even though he didn't know what he'd done wrong. Then the baby arrived, a girl, Maya, tiny and loud and alive. Ethan cried when he held her for the first time. Not the neat, dignified tears people post online. The ugly kind, the kind that surprises you. A nurse came in with paperwork, a stack of forms clipped to a board. "Just the birth certificate information and the acknowledgement," she said. Ethan's hands were still shaking from holding Maya. Alyssa was exhausted, eyes half closed. Ethan signed where the nurse pointed. He didn't read the paragraphs. He didn't understand the legal weight. He saw the word father and assumed it was simply describing what he already felt. And in that room, with the soft hum of hospital machines and the smell of disinfectant, that signature became a door Ethan walked through without knowing someone had built a trap on the other side. For the first few years, life looked normal. Maya learned to walk by, grabbing Ethan's pant leg. She learned to talk by shouting, "Dada!" from the back seat, laughing when he turned around at red lights. Ethan made pancakes on Saturday mornings. He knew which stuffed animal Maya couldn't sleep without. He kept a spare hair tie in his pocket because Alyssa always forgot. From the outside, they were an ordinary family. Inside, small fractures formed. Alyssa worked late more, often. She guarded her phone with a new intensity, and whenever Ethan tried to talk about the distance he felt growing, Alyssa accused him of paranoia. "You're imagining things," she'd say. "Why are you like this?" Ethan didn't have a good answer. He only knew that something was missing, like a low buzzing in the background of his life. Then, when Maya was 4, the first real crack happened. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was a pediatric appointment. Maya had developed strange bruising, small purple marks that seemed to appear too easily. The pediatrician wasn't panicked, but she was careful. She asked questions. She ordered labs. The results came back with a concern about a clotting factor. It was manageable, treatable, but it required more testing. The pediatrician asked about family history. Ethan and Alyssa both shook their heads. "No known bleeding disorders," Ethan said. Alyssa said, "None in my family." The pediatrician frowned, gently. "Sometimes these things follow patterns," she said. "We'll take a look." During that process, Ethan learned something he didn't know before. His blood type was O negative. Alyssa's was a positive. Maya's was AB positive. It was the nurse who mentioned it casually. "Oh, that's interesting," she said, not trying to be dramatic. Ethan didn't understand what she meant, so he smiled and nodded like he did. Later that night, at the kitchen table, Ethan Googled blood type inheritance. He stared at the chart. He refreshed the page. He read it again, and a cold feeling crept up the back of his neck. The chart said something simple. 2 people with O and A blood types can't produce an AB child. Not typically, not naturally. There were rare explanations. Lab error, misreporting, transfusions. But the simplest explanation was the one Ethan didn't let himself think. He closed his laptop and told himself it was nothing, because the alternative was impossible. Right? The next morning, Ethan brought it up carefully. "Hey," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "The nurse mentioned Maya's blood type. I looked up inheritance and maybe the lab got it wrong. Should we retest?" Alyssa froze, not in a dramatic way, in a microsecond way. Like the muscles in her face, had to choose between two emotions and couldn't decide fast enough. Then she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Ethan," she said, "don't start this." "Start what?" "This spiral." "I'm not spiraling. I'm just saying—" "You're saying I cheated," Alyssa snapped. Ethan's hands lifted in surrender. "No, I'm saying we should confirm the test." Alyssa's voice went cold. "Maya is your daughter. End of story." The finality of it should have soothed him. Instead, it made his stomach drop, because it sounded like a line she'd rehearsed. That's the thing about lies. When someone tells the truth, it usually has texture. It's messy. It includes unnecessary details. When someone lies, it can come out too clean, too perfect. Ethan told himself he was overthinking. He loved Maya, and love has a way of making you protect the story that supports it. But once the question exists, it doesn't disappear. It changes shape. It becomes quieter. And then one day it becomes loud again. The marriage didn't survive. Ethan and Alyssa lasted another year after the blood type conversation, but by then, the house felt like two separate lives overlapping. They fought about money. They fought about time. They fought about Ethan's lack of trust and Alyssa's lack of transparency. And finally, Alyssa filed for divorce. She did it fast. She did it with an attorney Ethan had never heard of, an attorney who seemed to have a stack of documents prepared like the ending had been planned long before the beginning. The divorce hearings took place in a family court building that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. The lights were harsh, the benches were stiff. Ethan asked for 50-50 custody. Alyssa argued that Ethan's work schedule made him unreliable. The court ordered a standard arrangement. Ethan would get weekends, he would pay child support, and he would continue paying for Maya's health insurance. Ethan accepted it because he had no choice, but he fought to remain present. He took on fewer projects. He left work early on Fridays. He learned how to braid Maya's hair after watching videos late at night. On his weekends, he made the same pancakes. He took Maya to the park and pushed her on the swing until his arms ached. He told her, "No matter what, I'm here." Maya believed him. Alyssa watched it all with a face that never softened. And slowly, Ethan began to notice something. Whenever he mentioned paperwork, insurance forms, school records, medical appointments, Alyssa became tense. Whenever he asked for copies of Maya's birth certificate or immunization records, Alyssa delayed. "Later," she'd say, or "I'll handle it." Ethan thought she was controlling. He didn't yet understand she was guarding something. The second crack came from a place Ethan didn't expect, a stranger. It was a Saturday afternoon at a grocery store. Ethan had Maya in the cart, holding a small box of cereal like it was treasure. As Ethan reached for coffee, a man passed them in the aisle. He slowed. He looked at Maya, then he looked at Ethan. There was a pause long enough to feel. The man's eyes flicked over Maya's face, her nose, her chin, the way her eyebrows moved when she concentrated, and something in the man's expression tightened. He kept walking. Ethan watched him go, unsettled for reasons he couldn't name. Later, in the parking lot, Ethan saw the same man leaning against a car, phone to his ear, gaze fixed on them. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He buckled Maya into her booster seat faster than usual. He glanced back. The man was gone. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He replayed the moment in his head. The man's face wasn't familiar, but the look on that face was. It was recognition, not of Ethan, of Maya. A week later, Ethan brought it up to his sister, Claire. Claire was the kind of person who didn't sugarcoat. She had a nurse's bluntness, a hard-earned sense for when something wasn't right. Ethan told her about the blood type, the divorce, the strange man. Claire listened without interrupting. Then she said the sentence Ethan had been trying not to say to himself. "Ethan, Have you ever actually done a paternity test? Ethan laughed, but it came out strained. No, he said. Why would I? I was there when she was born. Claire held his gaze. That's not an answer. Ethan swallowed. The room felt too bright. I don't want to hurt. Maya, he said. Finding the truth isn't hurting her, Claire replied. Lies are what hurt people. Truth just shows you where the injuries already are. Ethan hated how right it sounded. If you've ever been in that moment, the moment where you realize you might have built your entire life on someone else's story, you know how the body reacts. Your throat tightens, your palms sweat, and the mind starts bargaining. Maybe the nurse wrote the blood type wrong. Maybe the lab mixed samples. Maybe genetics are weird. Anything but the obvious. But Ethan couldn't unsee the chart. He couldn't forget Alyssa's frozen face, and he couldn't shake the way that stranger had looked at Maya. So Ethan did something that felt both logical and terrifying. He called a private lab. The first test was a non-invasive cheek swab. Ethan waited until one of his weekends. Maya sat at the kitchen table, eating strawberries, while Ethan opened the kit with, shaking hands. He told Maya it was a silly science thing. Maya giggled. Ethan swabbed the inside of her cheek and tried to breathe. Then he swabbed his own. He mailed the samples, and he waited. Days stretched. Ethan went to work, answered emails, attended meetings. But inside he felt like he was living in a different timeline, a timeline that was slowly approaching a cliff. The results arrived on a Thursday. Ethan was alone in his apartment, the kind of place that still felt temporary, like he hadn't fully accepted his new life. He stared at the envelope before opening it. He could hear his own heartbeat. He tore it open. He scanned for the word he didn't want to see. And there it was. Probability of paternity, 0%. For a moment, Ethan's mind refused to process it. The letters looked like a different language. He read it again, and then the world tilted. His knees hit the carpet, not in a dramatic collapse, in a quiet surrender. Ethan pressed, his hand against his mouth, trying to keep any sound from escaping, because the sound would make it real. The report didn't say, "Your daughter isn't yours." It didn't mention Maya's laughter or the way she fell asleep during cartoons. It was clinical, it was mathematical, and it took 8 years of fatherhood and reduced it to a statistic. Ethan sat there for a long time. Then, in the rawness of shock, he did the next thing that felt impossible. He called Alyssa. Alyssa answered on the third ring. "What?" Ethan's voice came out thin. "I did a test," he said. Silence. "I did a paternity test." Alyssa exhaled slowly, like someone who had been holding their breath for years. "You had no right," she said. Ethan flinched. "That's your first response?" he asked. "Not what? Not how? Not—" "No," Alyssa snapped, "because I knew you'd do this eventually." Ethan's stomach twisted. "You knew," he repeated. Alyssa's voice lowered. "Don't do this on the phone." Ethan almost laughed. "Don't do this," he said. "Alyssa, I raised her. I pay for her. She is your child," Alyssa said, sharp. Ethan's hands shook. "No," he whispered. "She isn't." Alyssa's breath hitched. Then quietly she said, "Biology isn't the only thing that makes a father." Ethan heard the logic in it. He also heard the manipulation. "You lied," he said. Alyssa didn't deny it. Instead, she said something that changed everything. "You signed the acknowledgement. You're her legal father. The court doesn't care what some test says." Ethan's head lifted. "What?" Alyssa's tone grew steadier, as if she felt stronger on familiar terrain. "You signed," she repeated. "You wanted to be her father. You are her father." Ethan realized in that moment that Alyssa had been preparing for this exact conversation for years, and that meant the lie wasn't accidental, it was engineered. Ethan ended the call without another word. Then he made a different call, to an attorney. At first, Ethan thought the path would be straightforward. A test says he's not the biological father. A court changes the child support order. Done. But family law doesn't always run on common sense. In many places, once paternity is legally established, especially through an acknowledgement signed at birth, undoing it becomes incredibly difficult. Not because the truth doesn't matter, because the system prioritizes stability. Children need consistent legal parents, the argument goes. Courts don't want kids tossed between adults based on late discoveries. So Ethan's attorney, Marisol Dean, laid out the reality. It's not just about biology, she told him, sitting across a table scattered with documents. It's about what was represented to you, what was hidden, what can be proven. Ethan's voice was hoarse. I have proof, he said, tapping the lab report. Marisol nodded. That's proof of non-paternity, she said. Not necessarily proof of fraud. Ethan stared. You mean I could still be forced to pay? Marisol didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. If the court sees you as the legal father and decides it's in the child's best interest to keep it that way. Ethan felt nausea rise. So what do I do? Marisol leaned forward. We build an evidence chain, she said. We show that Alyssa didn't just make a mistake. We show she knowingly misrepresented paternity. We show she used the system to extract money under false pretenses. Ethan's jaw clenched. And then? And then, Marisol said, we ask for relief. We ask to terminate support. And we consider a separate civil claim for damages. Ethan blinked. Damages, he repeated. Marisol's expression stayed careful. In rare cases, she said, when there's clear, intentional fraud, courts can award restitution and, depending on the jurisdiction, punitive damages. But it's not easy, and it gets ugly. Ethan didn't care about ugly, he cared about truth, and he cared about one more thing. Maya. What happens to her? He asked. Marisol's gaze softened. That, she said, depends on what you choose. Ethan's throat tightened, because the most terrifying part wasn't losing money. It was losing the right to say, "Good night, kiddo." The legal battle began like all legal battles do, not with shouting, with paper. Marisol filed a motion to reopen the paternity determination and modify the support order. Alyssa responded fast. Her attorney argued that Ethan was the legal father and had acted as the father for years, that he had voluntarily assumed the role, that disrupting it now would harm the child. Ethan read those words and felt his stomach twist, because the argument wasn't wrong. He had assumed the role, he had loved her, but the argument also felt like a trap, like the system was saying, you loved her, so now you must pay for the lie forever. Marisol pushed for discovery, medical records, communications, work travel logs, anything that could establish what Alyssa knew and when. Alyssa resisted. She claimed privacy. She claimed harassment. She claimed Ethan was trying to punish her. And then, a month into the case, something happened that shifted the ground. Ethan received an email from an unknown address, no greeting, no signature, just one sentence. She knew before Maya was born. Attached was a scanned document, a lab report, dated more than 9 years earlier. It referenced a prenatal paternity test, and it listed the probability of paternity as 0%. Ethan's hands went numb. He stared at the date. He stared at Alyssa's name. He stared at the words until they blurred. If it was real, it meant Alyssa had known. Before the baby's first cry, before the birth certificate, before Ethan signed the acknowledgement. Ethan called Marisol immediately. Marisol's voice sharpened. "If this is authentic," she said, "it changes everything." The next weeks became a careful hunt. Marisol subpoenaed the lab. The lab confirmed the test existed. But the record showed something strange. The report had been accessed and reprinted multiple times, and then, months later, it had been marked voided due to administrative correction. Marisol wasn't impressed. "Labs don't void paternity reports because someone feels like it," she said. She requested audit logs, she requested communication records, and eventually, under pressure, the lab produced internal notes. Alyssa had called. She had insisted the report was wrong. She had demanded it be removed, and a supervisor had complied. Why? Because the supervisor wasn't just a random employee. He was someone Alyssa knew, someone she had worked with, someone who later left the lab and joined her healthcare company. That's when Ethan realized the lie wasn't just personal, it was networked. It had help. And if you're thinking, how could someone do that? Ask yourself a simpler question. How often do systems rely on trust? How often do people assume paperwork is honest because it's printed on official letterhead? How often do we sign something because a nurse points at a line and the room feels too full of emotion to ask questions? That trust is the oxygen of society, and oxygen is easy to steal when no one expects to be suffocating. Alyssa's attorney tried to shut it down. He argued the prenatal report was irrelevant. He argued it was privileged. He argued it was being used to embarrass Alyssa. Marisol didn't bite. She filed a motion accusing Alyssa of intentional misrepresentation and asked the court to consider sanctions. The family court, as judge, scheduled an evidentiary hearing. It would be the first time Alyssa would have to answer questions under oath. Ethan felt sick at the thought, not because he feared the truth, because he feared what the truth would do to Maya. At home, Maya still called him Dad. She still told him about school art projects. She still asked if he could come to her dance recital. Ethan smiled and said yes. Then he went to his car and sat with his hands on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Because how do you look into a child's face and carry a secret like that? The evidentiary hearing happened on a rainy morning. Grey light pressed against the courthouse windows, the kind of rain that doesn't pour, it just persists. Ethan sat beside Marisol, hands clasped. Alyssa sat across from them, posture straight, makeup perfect, eyes steady. When she was sworn in, her voice didn't tremble. Marisol began gently. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "when did you learn you were pregnant?" Alyssa answered. "When did you inform Mr. Cole?" Alyssa answered. Marisol's tone stayed calm. "Did you have any reason to believe Mr. Cole might not be the biological father?" Alyssa paused. The pause was small, but in court, small pauses are loud. "No," Alyssa said. Marisol nodded as if accepting it. Then she slid the prenatal report across the table. "Is this your name?" Marisol asked. Alyssa's eyes flicked to the paper. "Yes," she said. "Is this your date of birth?" "Yes." "Is this your signature on the consent form attached to the report?" Alyssa's lips tightened. "Yes." Marisol let the silence stretch. "So you're telling this court you had no reason to believe Mr. Cole might not be the father," Marisol said, "even though this report states a 0% probability of paternity months before Maya was born?" Alyssa's face changed, not into guilt, into anger. "That report was wrong," she said. Marisol leaned in. "Wrong," she repeated. "Or inconvenient." Alyssa's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Marisol continued. "You contacted the lab. You requested it be voided. You had a professional relationship with a supervisor who later joined your company. Do you deny that?" Alyssa's eyes narrowed. "I didn't force anyone," she said. Marisol's voice stayed even. "No," she agreed. You didn't hold a gun to anyone's head. You applied pressure, you used access, you used connections. Alyssa's hands curled into fists. I was scared, she snapped. Marisol's eyebrows lifted. Scared of what? Alyssa's voice cracked for the first time. Of losing everything, she said. Marisol didn't raise her voice. Your marriage wasn't built yet, she said. You were scared of losing Ethan because you knew Ethan might not raise a child that wasn't his. Alyssa's eyes flashed. He would have left, she said. Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest, because in that sentence, Alyssa confirmed the thing he needed confirmed. She knew, and she made a choice. The family court judge didn't rule that day. He took the evidence under advisement. He ordered additional discovery, and he did something else. He appointed a guardian ad litem for Maya, a neutral attorney tasked with representing the child's interests. For Ethan, that was both relief and terror. Relief because Maya would have someone in the room focused on her. Terror because it meant the case was now officially recognized as something that could reshape a child's life. In the weeks that followed, the guardian ad litem interviewed Ethan, interviewed Alyssa, interviewed teachers, interviewed Maya. Ethan wasn't present for Maya's interview, but he heard about it later. Maya had been asked simple questions. Who takes you to school? Who helps with homework? Who do you call when you're scared? Maya's answers were consistent. Dad. 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 Ethan cried when Marisol told him, not because it helped his case, because it reminded him of the truth that mattered most. Whatever a lab report said, Maya loved him. Then came the twist, not in the DNA, not in the prenatal report, in the identity of the biological father. As discovery expanded, Marisol subpoenaed Alyssa's communications around the time of conception. Texts, emails, calendar entries. The pattern that emerged wasn't random. There was one name that kept appearing. Grant Holloway. Grant wasn't an old boyfriend. He wasn't a stranger. He was a senior executive at Alyssa's healthcare company. He was married, he was wealthy, and according to the records, he had been meeting Alyssa late at night at a corporate apartment the company maintained for visiting partners. Ethan stared at the timeline, nausea rising, because it was the kind of thing you see in movies, the powerful executive, the employee, the hidden relationship. But then Marisol pointed to something else, payments, large transfers, not to Alyssa, to the lab supervisor, and to a private investigator, and to a law firm Ethan had never heard of. Marisol's voice was low. This isn't just an affair, she said. This looks like a cover-up. Ethan felt cold. Why? He whispered. Marisol didn't hesitate. Because if Grant was exposed as the father, she said, his career could collapse, his marriage could collapse, the company could face scrutiny, and Alyssa... Marisol let the sentence hang. And Alyssa got stability, Ethan finished. Marisol nodded. And money, she added. Ethan's hands shook as he flipped through records. Then he saw it, Grant's home address, and suddenly Ethan remembered the grocery store, the man who stared at Maya, the recognition. Ethan's chest tightened, because he wasn't just looking at proof, he was looking at a person who might have known the truth the entire time. Marisol made a strategic decision. She filed a separate civil lawsuit, not just to terminate support, to seek damages for paternity fraud, intentional misrepresentation, and restitution. Alyssa's attorney called it vindictive. Marisol called it accountability. But the civil case introduced something new, a bigger playing field, more discovery, more exposure, and a new defendant, Grant Holloway, because the evidence suggested he hadn't just been the biological father. He had helped fund the concealment. If that could be proven, it meant the lie wasn't only Alyssa's, it was a partnership. Grant's attorneys responded aggressively. They denied everything. They claimed the communications were taken out of context. They accused Ethan of extortion. They filed motions to dismiss. But Grant made one mistake. He testified. And under Irvoinos' oath, he tried to reduce the entire situation to one sentence. "I don't know that child," he said. Marisol didn't argue. She didn't get emotional. She simply asked a question. "Then why," she said, "did you pay for a lab report to be voided?" Grant blinked. "I didn't," he said. Marisol slid a bank record onto the screen, a transfer from a shell company to the lab supervisor, with a memo line that read like a whisper. "Consulting." Marisol's tone stayed steady. "This account belongs to an entity you control," she said. "Correct?" Grant's jaw tightened. "Yes," he admitted. "And this transfer was made 2 days after Ms. Cole contacted the lab," Marisol said. Grant's eyes narrowed. "That could be coincidence," he said. Marisol nodded. "It could," she agreed, "if it happened once." Then she brought up the next transfer, and the next. A pattern, not a coincidence. Grant's attorney objected. The Ioan Aegis judge overruled. Grant looked at the judge, then back at Marisol. For the first time, his confidence faltered. Because in civil court, patterns speak, and patterns don't care how powerful you are. The family court ruling came first. The judge terminated Ethan's future child support obligation. He found that Alyssa had knowingly misrepresented paternity. He acknowledged Ethan's bond with Maya, and he carved out a specific order. Ethan could maintain visitation if both parties agreed, and if it remained in Maya's best interests. The ruling was complicated, because life is complicated. Ethan wasn't forced to pay anymore, but he also wasn't guaranteed access. He had won relief, and still, he could lose his daughter. Ethan sat in his car after the hearing, rain tapping the windshield. He didn't feel victorious, he felt hollow, because the court had recognized the fraud, but it couldn't fix the emotional debt. The civil case moved forward, and, as it did, more details surfaced. Alyssa had taken the prenatal test, not because she was curious, because she was uncertain. She had been seeing Ethan and Grant during the same window. When the test returned 0% for Ethan, she panicked, not about Maya, about herself, her image, her future, her security. So she did what some people do when fear meets opportunity. She chose the path that protected her, even if it destroyed someone else. In court filings, Alyssa's attorneys tried a new angle. They argued that Ethan had benefited from being Maya's father, that love was not a loss, that parenting wasn't a transaction. Marisol didn't disagree with the sentiment. She disagreed with the logic. "Love isn't a debt," she argued, "but fraud is." Because Ethan wasn't suing Maya. He wasn't asking the child to pay. He was asking the adults who built the lie to be responsible for the damage it caused. The court heard expert testimony. Financial analysts calculated the direct payments Ethan had made: child support, insurance, education costs, extracurriculars. They calculated lost opportunities, projects Ethan declined, jobs he didn't pursue because he needed stability for a family he thought was his. They calculated emotional damages, though those numbers were always imperfect. How do you quantify 8 years of being told, implicitly, that your trust was a tool to be used? How do you quantify the moment you realize your daughter's baby photos are evidence in a lawsuit? The defense tried to minimize. They called Ethan bitter. They called him obsessive. They suggested he was trying to punish Alyssa for leaving. Marisol played a recording, a phone call from months earlier, Ethan's voice trembling. "I don't want to hurt her," he said. "I just need to know what's true." The courtroom listened, and for a moment the case wasn't about money. It was about a man trying to keep his life from splitting in half. Alyssa testified again in civil court. This time, the questions were sharper, because now the issue wasn't just best interests, it was liability. Marisol asked Alyssa about the hospital paperwork. Alyssa admitted she had guided Ethan's hand. She had pointed to where he should sign. She had encouraged speed. "Why?" Marisol asked. Alyssa stared at the table. "I wanted our family," she said. Marisol's tone hardened. "You wanted a family," she corrected. "Or you wanted a shield?" Alyssa's eyes flashed. "You don't understand," she snapped. "Grant would have destroyed me. He would have denied it. He would have left me alone with the truth," Marisol finished. Alyssa's mouth opened, then closed, because that was the core. Alyssa didn't lie because she was confused. She lied because she thought the truth would cost her, so she made someone else pay. Grant's testimony grew worse. Tweed. Documents surfaced. It became clear he had known the result. He had exchanged messages with Alyssa that referenced making it disappear. He had discussed risk. He had agreed to cover expenses. And one single email, contained a sentence that hit the courtroom like a slap. "She'll be better off with him on paper," Grant wrote. "He'll do what he's supposed to." On paper. Ethan read the line and felt his face burn. He had been reduced to a function, a wallet, a legal placeholder, a man used for stability while another man protected his reputation. If you've ever wondered why betrayal can feel physical, it's because the body recognizes when you've been treated like an object. By the time the case reached its final phase, the public had started paying attention. Not because Ethan wanted publicity, because court records have a way of leaking into the world when powerful people are involved. Whispers spread. A healthcare executive. A cover-up. A father raising a child under false pretenses. Grant's company issued a vague statement about personal matters. Grant took a leave of absence. Alyssa's colleagues stopped answering her texts. And suddenly, the lie wasn't just private. It was visible. Ethan didn't celebrate that. He didn't want a scandal. He wanted his reality back. The final hearing was scheduled months later, and that's where we began. The quiet courtroom, the polished table, the judge's voice. By that point, the court had heard enough to make specific findings. That Alyssa had knowingly misrepresented paternity, that she had taken steps to conceal evidence, that Grant had participated in the concealment, that Ethan had suffered financial and emotional harm as a direct result. The judge's ruling was measured, but the consequences were massive. He ordered restitution for child support payments. He awarded damages for intentional misrepresentation. He awarded punitive damages, citing the deliberate nature of the concealment. He included attorney's fees, and the total reached the number that made the room go silent: $5 million. Not because money could undo the years, because the court wanted a message to be clear. If you weaponize trust, if you use the legal system as a tool for a lie, the cost can be catastrophic. After the ruling, reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Microphones pointed like spears. Questions shouted. Ethan walked past them without speaking. He wasn't interested in headlines. He was thinking about Maya. Because while the adults fought in court, Maya had continued living. She still had school, friends, dance recitals. And somewhere in her small heart, she still had a story about who her dad was. Ethan didn't want to tear that story apart. He wanted to protect it. But now, protection had to include truth. Ethan met with the guardian Chiejesa, Litam again. He met with a child therapist recommended by the court. And slowly, carefully, Ethan began a new kind of honesty. Not the kind that dumps everything on a child. The kind that holds a child's feelings like fragile glass. He told Maya that families can be made in different ways. He told her he loved her. He told her that nothing she did caused any of this. And when Maya asked the question that all children ask when they sense a shift, "Are you still my dad?" Ethan's throat tightened. He knelt down until his eyes were level with hers, and he said the only answer that mattered. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm always here." Maya didn't understand the law, but she understood presence. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Ethan held her, feeling the weight of her small body, the warmth of her hair, and for the first time in months, he breathed. People ask what happens after a case like this. Do you rebuild? Do you move on? Do you ever trust again? Ethan didn't have neat answers. The money didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't rewind the years. It didn't turn the lie into a bad dream. But it did something else. It drew a line. It said, publicly, officially, that what happened was wrong. That Ethan wasn't crazy for asking questions. That love doesn't make fraud acceptable. And that a child's innocence doesn't excuse an adult's deception. If you were in Ethan's place, what would you do? Would you chase the truth even if it risked shattering your life? Or would you stay silent to keep the story intact? There's no easy answer, because human beings aren't built to choose between truth and love. We want both, and when someone forces you to pick, they're not just lying, they're stealing. In the months after the ruling, Grant resigned. Alyssa tried to appeal. The appeal failed. Payments began. Not all at once. Structured, enforced, monitored. Ethan didn't buy a mansion or a sports car. He didn't post about it. He quietly paid off debts. He set money aside for Maya's future, because even if he wasn't her biological father, he was still the person who cared whether she had a stable start. And he did something that surprised even his attorney. He refused to speak publicly about Maya's details. He refused interviews. He refused to let the world turn her into a symbol. Because for Ethan, she was never a case. She was a child. Years from now, Maya might learn everything. She might read court documents. She might ask hard questions. She might feel anger, confusion, grief. Ethan can't control that. The only thing he can control is what he does now. And what he chose, over and over, was to be the kind of father who doesn't disappear when life gets complicated. Because biology didn't make Ethan's hands hold Maya's bike steady when she learned to ride. Biology didn't make him sit in a freezing school, auditorium, and clap until his palms stung. Biology didn't make him show up. Choice did, but choice doesn't excuse deception. And that's the lesson that echoes through this story. Trust is powerful. Family is sacred. And when someone twists those things into a tool, the damage doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It touches the child. It touches the father. It touches everyone who believed the story. In the end, the judge's ruling wasn't just about money. It was about responsibility, a line drawn in permanent ink, a recognition that a signature made under false pretenses can change a life, and a reminder that when the truth finally arrives, whether it comes in a lab report, a subpoena, or a sentence spoken in a silent courtroom, it doesn't ask permission, it simply lands. And you have to decide what kind of person you'll be when it does. Ethan decided. Not with $5 million, with a steady voice in a quiet room, telling a child the only thing she needed to know. I'm here.